Prior to the MA, I worked as a freelance travel and editorial photographer. Based in Western Australia, I would regularly shoot commissions for the airline publication sector and many travel clients based in Europe. It was a great experience with lots of opportunity to photograph and interact with other cultures around the world. At the time, I was happy to do this, happy to be paid to photograph and have my work published. I did, however, start to question the validity of what I was doing, regularly seeing a distinct difference between what I was photographing and presenting to editors and awaiting audiences, which was primarily a Western audience, in contrast to the environments in which I was photographing. As an example of this, I was photographing the coastal areas of Mombasa, Kenya, aiming to capture the beautiful sunrises over the Indian Ocean that are quite stunning. This kind of image was typical of my practice at that time and would be used to sell the location as a holiday destination, whilst at the same time that I was photographing on this beautiful image to sell to Western audiences, those same Western tourists would show a clear indifference to the local population, rarely venturing out and engaging with them, seemingly continuing to view the exotic from the safety of a hotel bar. These questions would persist and come up again later on when I was on assignment for National Geographic Traveller in Bali, illustrating an article that was written during a press junket by writer Helen Warwick. Bali's economy centres and relies on this promotion as its primary source of income and would possibly suffer if this was to stop. It is a situation that only exists through the continued influx of travellers, which has happened in the region for decades. Although not directly affiliated with National Geographic Traveller, being that it is a franchise of the esteemed publication, National Geographic themselves have acknowledged a past built on the exploitative imagery of anthropological study and exoticism through the issue of an apology in their April 2018 race issue. During my time as a freelancer, I would regularly seek out interesting projects to promote my editorial practice, and this is what first led me to the idea of communities, without a true realization of its impact on my work. My series Classifieds looked at how people were trying to build relationships with each other via the online small ad site Gumtree. I responded to their adverts asking for a portrait instead. Later, I spent some time shooting a small band of urban bicycle polo players that formed a close-knit community in this rough and ready sport within the city of Perth. Western Australia at that time was beating the recession and was in the midst of a large mining and resources boom that brought in people from all over the world. Living in the most remote city on the planet, this had implications on the community and the environments that they inhabited. I explored this idea in my project $1 Million Sandpit that looked at the vast, largely sterile housing estates cropping up all around Perth, influenced by Ben Roberts' topographic approach in his series The Gathering Clouds that showed the uninhabited Spanish housing estates as a result of the recession. When I moved back to the UK, I took up a job teaching photography at FE level and went back to my photographic roots. In terms of technical exploration and looking at new photographers, this has inspired my practice and helped to refine my craft. Todd Hydo has said that his solid grounding in technical craft has been vital to making work the way it needs to be made. It has been quite an invigorating time for my work, albeit fairly directionless in terms of the context and in creating a focused project. Looking at more personal explorations, short projects, and sketches of ideas. During this period, however, I sought to underpin my practice and began reading more photographic and non-photographic related books that have since informed my work. For example, through reading Geoff Dyer's book The Ongoing Moment, I started considering the affinity for photographers to look at similar subject matter. These become cultural signifiers that can inform us of the time and context in which the images were taken, such as fashion and objects that everybody own, in different states of condition. My personal images during this time was very much limited to using a point-and-shoot camera, as it coincided with the birth of my daughter. Opportunities to photograph were initially limited to long walks with the pram, and the necessity of being able to photograph with one hand without the time to stop and consider a shot became an important consideration. The images were initially taken for habitual reasons, as a reflex, then put away. The more I shot the images, developed them and stored them, the more I wanted to look back over them and start to create narratives of the work. Referring to the writing of Dyer, I started to consider what were the cultural signifiers within the images that I had been creating, and what was this saying about the times we are living in. I did aim to apply this to a more in-depth body of work when I created the short series Better the Devil You Know, a topographical look at the constituencies that voted either leave or remain in the EU referendum, where I asked the question of whether the environmental conditions of a particular area could contribute to the decision on the Brexit vote. This was created in a more overt, obvious manner, as opposed to Simon Roberts' look at the literal political landscape of his election project. My narrative was a conscious editing of the colour grade of each image to include a slight red tint for leave and a slight blue for remain, which were then placed side by side for direct comparison. This exploration of looking back at work long after it has been completed is something that I have come to again through the project 4 Prefectures of Japan, which was an attempt to recontextualise some of my earlier travel work into a more faithful study of a country where I spent 5 weeks in 2010. Influenced by Harvey Benger's work Nothing Eventually, which was shot in Tokyo over a 15-year period, I wanted to construct a new narrative from my own images, my thinking being that I might be able to be more objective due to the time spent not looking at them. It was also an opportunity to attempt and answer those questions that had come up earlier in my career. At the same time as I came back to this body of work, I was reading Mark Seeley's book, Decolonising the Camera, which challenges us to consider the way images have been created from the viewpoint of the white European and its racial subtext. However, Seeley challenges us not to shy away from this fact. We must work in full knowledge of this past. Patrick Waterhouse exemplifies this approach with his collaborative series Restricted Images, made in partnership with the Warlpiri of Central Australia, and turns the concept of what we know about anthropological photography and the exotic into a narrative made together with the subjects of his work. This kind of collaboration is something I feel I should include in my own work. Community is an area that I have looked at many times throughout my personal work, and it is an area that holds great interest to me. Recently, I have come to look at the theory of social capital and how it is related to my work all along. The theory, outlined in Robert Putnam's book Bowling Alone, refers to the relationships that allow society to function. These are created through homogeneous bonds, the relationships within them, and the links to those outside of established relationships and bonds. Specifically for Putnam, it is a look at how the traditional forms of social capital have declined through civic, religious, and political disengagement. My research project will look to ask what has changed and what is replacing these previous forms of social engagement. I am interested in investigating how society seeks community in a new era of connectivity. I aim to relate this to my own sense of community. My formative years were spent in the working class male demographic, considered to be one of the lowest attaining groups in the UK. Through education, personal experience and career progression, my demographic has changed. I have found that I no longer fit into the world of my formative years, nor fully in the middle-class community where I now find myself. Photography is a crucial tool, evidencing and documenting defining societal signifiers. Community as the focus is a rich subject, as shown through the work of other photographers such as Laura Panack, Alex Soff and Peter Hugo. As a white middle-class male, my demographic is already ubiquitous in the photographic world. Does this require me to stop being able to contribute to that conversation? No. However, it requires me to work with the different communities I am exploring to ensure that they are appropriately and credibly represented.